Hi, everyone. My name is Clint Wyckoff, and I'm going to be your host today on AWS Supports You. I'm an enterprise support manager based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. As an enterprise support manager, I lead a team of technical account managers, TAMs, who work directly with our AWS enterprise support customers on their journey in the cloud. Welcome to AWS Supports You, where we provide expert tips to optimize performance in the cloud, lower costs, and provide you with best practices and design considerations. I'm going to drop a link to the chat in here in a second that relates to our premium support offerings, so you can check those out at your leisure. Joining me today on AWS Supports You is Arvind from our specialist TAM organization. Interesting fact about Arvind, I just learned before this, is he is also a Penn State alumni also. So Arvind, welcome to AWS Supports You.
Thank you, Clint. Hello, everyone. My name is Arvind Raghunathan. I'm a specialist technical account manager focused on operations and guiding enterprise support customers in their operations excellence outcomes for the past 7 years at AWS.
Awesome. And Arvind, as I understand, you recently published a white paper on the operations readiness review. I'll drop a link to the chat here in a second, but that's really good. It relates to today's topic at hand. In it, what's the white paper all entail?
Yeah, it's actually the theme of today's session on building effective operational readiness review, some of which at a high level we'll be covering today for sure. But I do encourage, there's limited time. There is so much to unpack. So definitely encourage you to take a look at the white paper, and we'll talk about that in the end as well. But there are some core concepts we'll cover today.
Awesome. I will drop a link to that in the chat here momentarily. In the meantime, before we get over to the presentation and demo at hand today, a note to the viewers online. Please feel free to utilize the chat option that's over to the right-hand side of the screen there. We definitely want to hear your questions. We'll be answering those live. And also, let us know where you're joining us from today. Drop your city, location, country. This is a live episode, so it's good to see where the community is joining us from. Also, if you have any questions about AWS services, please head over to repost.aws. We have experts online that are waiting to answer your questions, and who knows, one of those questions that you ask over on Repost might be featured on a future episode of AWS Supports You. Last and definitely not least, to give us feedback, you can email us at awssupportsyou@amazon.com or take our survey here that we've got a link that will drop in the chat as well. Arvind, so I'm going to toss the ball over to you now. Can you give us a rundown of what we're going to be talking about today?
Absolutely. Thank you, Clint. So working with enterprise support customers has provided us the opportunity to solving various operational readiness review challenges, utilizing the best practices and strategies, like I said, which we will discuss in today's topic, building an effective operational readiness review. I will be referring to the term operational readiness review as also ORR for short during this presentation, so bear with me. So we'll first cover the context of these best practices from the AWS well-architected operational excellence pillar. We will then set the stage on why ORR is a key to successful operations. We will discuss how to build those effective ORRs as a practice, followed by strategies to help accelerate implementation of the ORR across your organization, including practical real-world examples in action. Operational excellence, it's one of the 6 pillars in well-architected framework. The well-architected framework is our customer-facing implementation of our internal review process, where we have codified our principal engineering thinking across field roles like solutions architects and internal engineering teams. It's a scalable mechanism that lets you take advantage of these learnings. So coming to the operational excellence pillar, the key takeaway message here is the OE pillar, the operations excellence pillar, is all about how operations helps meet and accelerate business outcomes. One of my favorite quotes, which I think is fantastic, is from our Amazon Web Services CTO, Werner Vogel, who says everything fails all the time. At AWS, we strive to build and operate highly resilient services, keeping in mind that everything fails all the time. And building distributed systems is hard. Maintaining them in an operational state is even harder. We recognize this. The question is not if a system will fail, but when it will, you want to be prepared for that. Many of our customers put tremendous focus on new workloads during the project phase, but keep in mind those workloads spend majority of their life in production. So be sure that you are ready for when a workload goes live. Let's talk about some of those operational challenges. Our customers talk to us what those key ORR challenges are. We'll discuss some of those top level here. And we can all relate to one or more of these challenges. And I've also been deeply involved in as a customer in some of these challenges prior to working at AWS. For example, every release to production was considered as a snowflake, and we knew it didn't have to be that way. Let's look at the next one. This is where key configuration items were either missed or not appropriately defined. For example, what should be the capacity needs based on your traffic patterns or expected scale in traffic, for example? What are those auto scaling policy configurations for your workload? Now, there were legitimate efforts to release features for our customers, but operations were often an afterthought. This is precisely why in the operational excellence pillar of well architected, we emphasize design with operations in mind. Here's another interesting one. Failed deployments is typically a result when deployments are either not automated or there is inability to support safe rollout strategies. Stuff like blue green, canaries, etc. Customers often get challenged with what to monitor. What are those metrics and those key performance indicators as a starting point? So, in effect, you could miss alerts if you're being very conservative, or if you're too aggressive, that could also result in many alerts causing alert fatigue. Having the right observability is a key factor. For example, if not having deep health checks to monitor those dependent systems can lead to masking a downstream degraded system, which may lead to your overall system to appear healthy when they are actually not. An operator's handicap is wading in the sea of red alerts, desperately looking for that magic command, that was supposed to be in the doc. And trust me, it's not a pleasant feeling. So, not having those proper runbooks, playbooks to aid those key steps to recovery or troubleshoot systematically, those can risk or have inability to meet your goals, such as mean time to recover. Last but not the least, not incorporating those lessons learned as documentation, problem management, to narrow those cause and contributing factors for the event. And more importantly, allocating those work cycles to make those improvements can be a big inhibition. So we talked about those various types of operational challenges. What does it mean for the business as a broader systemic issue? Having a workload which is secure, cost optimized, reliable, performant is fantastic. But if your teams cannot run and operate it effectively, then it becomes an overhead to the business. The growing list of non-functional requirements, often it is referred to as technical debt. This is due to those vicious cycle of not creating mechanisms to tackle ORR at scale. Another concern is you have the same limited pool of operators or those operational resources And they're all tackling competing priorities that leads to operator toil. At this point, Clint wanted to take a pause and see if we have any questions.
We don't have any questions in the chat yet. However, I am going to just drop a poll here. So if you wouldn't mind, give us a +1 if you have gone through for one of your workloads and utilized the well-architected framework, and specifically the operational excellence pillar within the well-architected tool. I think the important thing to take away that Arvind called out there was the fact that things inevitably fail. And having been a TAM before, and Arvind, you're in our specialist TAM organization, we get to work with customers and help them understand that the things that they may not necessarily think of from a development perspective are important. How do you operationalize this? How do I run it after it's out of development? How do I manage this long-term, whenever it's a production workload? How do I monitor it? How do I deploy it as code? Those types of things. I guess maybe one question that I would throw over to you is, if I was an application owner and I went through the well-architected tool, which is self-service now through the AWS console, what would be the output I would expect to see from the operational excellence pillar?
There are various considerations and categories to unpack within the operations excellence pillar. And the topic at hand we are focused on is actually just one of those 11 questions. As you can see, there is a wealth of insight you can gain about how you approach various aspects of operational discipline, including operational readiness reviews, but also key factors, considerations around your cultural aspects like culture of shared learning, experimentation, automation, continuous improvement, and also at identifying and adopting the suitable operating model. So really, it's a collection of best practice served across cultural aspects, operating model, your design elements, your day two operations, and then of course the life cycle of continuous improvement. So a lot to unpack and expect.
It is, and I think you're going to touch on this a little bit, but it's important for folks to not be overwhelmed and to start with, low-hanging fruit on the tree, something small, achieve success, innovate and iterate over time. Is that a valid approach?
Absolutely. Even if as a starting baseline, you sit with your different stakeholders across your business, your operations counterpart, and identify even that in itself, we have found one of the key benefits is the shared understanding of the priorities in operations across teams. And that in itself is a big stepping stone in order for you to recognize and then be very deliberate about meeting and aligning your operations to meet your outcomes.
Nice. Well, we do have a +1 there from Following Toss. They said +1 or tried anyways. It's important, to go through these tools, especially, like I said, as you're trying to roll applications out to production and things, the well-architected tool is a good place to go, and it gives you different food for thought that you might not have thought about as you're going through the development cycle. So no specific questions yet, Arvind, so I will throw it back over to you and you can continue along.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So we covered all the aspects of the challenges. So let's talk about that mental model, how we have found effectiveness in creating a strategy that allows us to really innovate at scale. In the concept of mechanisms in the well-architected framework introduction, we refer to a quote from our founder, Jeff Bezos, who says, "Good intentions never work. You need good mechanisms to make anything happen." It's really important. I'll just go over it again. Good intentions never work. You need good mechanisms to make anything happen. What this means is you have to replace those human best efforts with repeatable, scalable procedures and tooling to meet your outcomes. So let's talk about what that means as a mechanism. So we can look at it from the aspect of a flywheel, or it's a virtuous cycle, and we'll see that in a moment. Basically, it's a system that reinforces and improves itself as it gets operationalized. It takes controllable inputs and transforms those into ongoing outputs to address a recurring business challenge. So, in the case of ORR mechanism, at the core, we seek to maintain agility without sacrificing the safety by keeping those operational load low while avoiding those predictable negative outcomes. So, as the proactive inputs I mentioned earlier, utilizing the operational excellence design principles along with those best practices, and more importantly, those lessons learned, which are very unique to your outcomes, once you aggregate those and provide it to your builders, now your builders have access to this wealth and are empowered to build efficient systems addressing those engineering complexity. And that's how resilient systems can be created by reducing the operational burden. And the more your organization adopts this, you realize the gains in the form of low operational burden. And with time, you're able to realize more time for your teams to solve those higher level tasks that matter to your business. And also furthering your investments into adopting those operational efficiencies. So the key aspect here is the cyclical nature of ORR mechanism that lends itself to solve those recurring opportunities and problems as opposed to one-off challenges. Another key aspect that we employ at Amazon, working backwards, it's a fundamental part of our innovation process. We start with the customer, understand what they truly want, and let that define and guide our efforts. Customer obsessed teams build products in response to those customer needs. So, understanding your customers and your business results is a key factor in shaping your operational priorities. In preparing to deliver IT service and to deploy your IT workloads, it's crucial to start with a customer. And you will find that your customer is not just obviously one person persona, but a range of people found in IT, in the lines of business, and in the executive suite. So, understanding your customer means understanding the varying needs of those stakeholders, and different stakeholders will have those different requirements. Some may emphasize cost optimization, others may underline speed of innovation, and others will care primarily about security. So, be ready to think through how each of those requirements translates into those readiness criteria. So, what is that customer experience? Be prepared and ready to think through how each of those requirements translates into those readiness criteria, and that may span across people, process, technology, which will then help you formulate your baseline for those ORR checklists. So, for example, data classification. If our customers can choose Amazon Macy, which recognizes sensitive data such as PII data, personally identifiable information. So has that been configured for your workload? We talked about scaling needs, managing those service quotas that helps manage quotas for over 100 plus AWS services centrally. And you could have workflow to automate using limit monitors or cost modeling, cost optimization may need the right tag governance for monetization or cost modeling, etc. So let's put this in perspective, what we just talked about, and how that can help derive your ORR baseline checklist. So you first start by identifying your stakeholders, like we talked about. There should be many stakeholders from operations to performance testing to security, architecture, finance, business intelligence, so on and so forth, you name it. So before you write down a single check, make sure that you are capturing everyone associated with your workload. Engage those executives also if possible to get the buy-in from the highest level. And obviously, without losing sight of your end customer, they are a key stakeholder as well in this process. So once you have defined that, then you can identify those requirements for each of those stakeholders. Like we said, different stakeholders will have different requirements. And as you can see from this example, uh, how a finance team looks at from showback or chargeback, or InfoSec is really focused in on encryption, privacy, development team on those feature launches. We talked about agility, right? So it's not just agility for delighting your customers, giving those features in a timely manner, but also for developer agility. Operations, they really are invested in things like uptimes and having the suitable alert response. So after having gathered such requirements, you can then start deriving those checklists. So we talked about for finance showback, that could be translated into those cost tagging model, or enforcing that budget alerts. From security, the encryption and how keys are managed is a very important element. Development, we talked about having that repository configurations in order for them to manage their workflow, velocity of development, and also production rollouts, safe rollout strategies. Operations, health checks, having those runbook procedures we talked about earlier, very key. So there is a lot of granularity when you are looking at deriving an operational checklist based on this working backwards. And I often find here that customers can create anywhere between like 80 and 100 checks, which is obviously considerably a lot more than you could define by doing this on your own. And having defined such a baseline, you could perform a prioritization. This is where putting things in perspective. For example, you could follow prioritization mechanism, like what are those must-have checks, or the should-have checks, or the nice-to-have checks, and keep in mind some of those checks will have associated service level agreements or those business promises associated. So obviously, it helps with your prioritization. So I'll be highlighting a couple of these because I want to put this in perspective. Later on in the demo, we'll see this in action. So I want to see how we carry forward what we have represented as a sample operational readiness review check, and how can we further enhance this in the adoption cycle later on. So just to keep something in the back of our minds as we keep going further. So let's take a look at how we defined what are those requirements from for ORR from AWS lens. We are focused on agility. We talked about earlier that our builders have to innovate at a rapid clip and are uh, looking for ways to delight our customers. And we do this by reducing the time to launch, by proactively detecting those launch blocking issues as early as possible in the software development lifecycle. And more importantly, avoiding them altogether. The other way we look at this is when incidents happen, we want them to be fewer, shorter, and smaller. So basically, we want reduced frequency of those incidents. We want to decrease the length of time of those incidents, and obviously reducing the blast radius, the impact that our customers may or may not see. Quick pause here. Anything to add here, Clint? Any questions?
We did have a question come through from a user, JibJab06. I just wanted to quickly, touch on here before we get to the question. The framework and methodology that we utilize here at Amazon being the operational readiness review, and you touched on a few points there that help us, as you said, move faster, be more agile, which relates to decreasing frequency of incidents, decreasing the length whenever incidents do occur, the impact, so decreasing the amount of time that it takes for us to resolve those problems, but then also the blast radius, the scope of impact, right? So those are great, outcomes that a customer might be able to achieve. Can you just rattle off maybe one or two different technical ways that, what is an example of something that a customer might be able to implement to decrease the scope of impact, for example, to make the blast radius smaller, just as a talking point?
Yeah, there's a lot to cover just on that aspect. We do have white papers covering on the topic of resilience. We have builders library article on cell-based architectures.
Mm-hmm.
We also focus on static stability, designing your workloads to be statically stable. So a lot of follow-ups that you can employ by looking at those articles. I'm afraid we'll run out of time if we
Mm-hmm.
go any more in depth, but those will provide as amazing guide in how you should consider designing for, with resilience in mind.
Sure. The cell-based architecture, I remember watching a reInvent video from a few years ago that actually gave a really good explanation of how, from a service perspective, AWS implements a cell-based architecture. I'll find the link to that and I'll throw it in the chat for the folks. One other thing that I would call out there is, utilizing a multi-account strategy, and being able to have that degree of separation between workloads and don't run, all of your production applications in a single production AWS account. You should think of accounts as degrees of separation, and the more accounts, the less the focused area of impact if something does go wrong, or if credentials, or if a rogue person comes in, or security goes awry, things of that nature, right? As you touched on earlier, Arvind, things inevitably will break. So to the question that Jib Jab asked there is, how does Trusted Advisor fit into the operational readiness review?
Oh, great point. We will be touching upon an aspect of ORR being a life cycle, which means it's not a once and done activity. And without divulging too much into the upcoming slides,
Mm-hmm.
but think of it as an iteration. So at Amazon, for all of our services, we at least run a baseline of ORR once a year. So what that means is that obviously when you're launching a workload net new, Trusted Advisor, gives you an insight into, all those opportunities where you can follow the best practices configuration. But when you're starting with a net new workload, there is not going to be a baseline for Trusted Advisor to give you deep insights. But when you're coming back to that ORR baseline, that gives you an opportunity to take Trusted Advisor also as a key input in considering, your readiness checks. Now that you have gained experience and, having that workload operating in production for a sufficient
Mm-hmm.
time, you can take advantage of the insights that Trusted Advisor provides in a more meaningful approach.
Sure. Yeah, there's lots of really good checks within Trusted Advisor. If you haven't taken a look at it, some examples are S3 buckets, which are open, security group rules. Some other ones are around like EC2 utilization, so low utilization EC2 instances, for example, for an opportunity to optimize and right size the environment. Those are just a few that I can think of off the top of my head, but. Please throw your questions in the chat there as we go along in the presentation. We do have a demo coming up here in a few minutes. So Arvind, I will throw it back over to you.
Thank you, Clint. So yeah, let's switch gears. We talked about the mechanism aspects, leaving off from the challenges that we undertake when it comes to ORR. Let's talk about the adoption cycle and how to implement ORR practice in your organization. What are those key considerations? Obviously, the first step is to create those checks on your own with those strategies that we just talked about, or you could work with your account team to get guidance using AWS experts. For example, we have professional services that can help your teams enable that. Or for enterprise support customers, we have proactive services that can also help achieve those outcomes. The next one is about building consistency for those standards for all workloads to utilize. So you create those patterns and templates and emphasize those important checks and the priorities we talked about based on like the key business promises, service level agreements, for example, or governance requirements that you may have. Another important element is to track your adoption. It could be as simple as documenting when was the last time an ORR was performed for that workload. And I just talked about the life cycle. It's important to pause and understand the effectiveness of those checks. You want to review it at a cadence, like operational metrics reviews, etc., and find out which of those checks are still applicable, meaningful. What have you learned from any checks that you have introduced? How have they helped contribute towards some of the goals? For example, we talked about fewer, shorter, and smaller outages. So you want to celebrate those wins as well for those effective checks. Now, in order to conduct ORR and to scale it out, it's best to have a tool. AWS built an internal tool to create those templates that provides those checks in the form of questions, links to cautionary tales, and it integrates with our ticketing systems. So in the absence of a tool, you could leverage well-architected custom links to build your own question set and guidance with those cautionary tales, references on why a check is important, etc. Alternatively, or additionally, you could also look at desired state configuration and compliance at scale to minimize those change-related incidents by leveraging configs conformance pack. And we'll be demoing this shortly, so you'll see this in perspective as well. So what all this comes down to is the benefits that you realize by integrating such a ORR discipline and practice at scale in your organization. So number one, it helps teams approaching with the design with operations in mind. It gives teams the ability, the confidence for launch readiness. It helps proactively surface and have those builders access to those best practices right from the get-go. It will help prevent known risks from occurring in other workloads. So lessons learned from one workload is now translated and taken advantage of for other workloads, other teams. And when incidents do occur, you have a robust incident mitigation strategy. I want to leave with a quick customer example. Again, a very nice pattern. They identified that their main challenge was to bring consistency of baselining their monitoring across workloads. So what they did was they took this as a step further to reduce the burden on the individual application teams by building this baseline of metrics, alarms, and dashboards as infrastructure as code so that every team utilizes or extends that to deploy their resources. It's a fantastic pattern. So because now they have achieved this monitoring governance as a baseline, they've taken that ORR step by automating this as a check. Yeah, before we run through the demo, next, Clint, was there a question?
No questions, Arvind. Okay. Feel free to proceed with the demo there.
Okay, excellent. All right, so in the demo, what you're seeing is in my AWS console, we will go through the well-architected tool, which is accessible in your console. And I will showcase custom lens, which is relatively new. We launched this at reInvent last year. You can start with creating a custom lens. We provide a sample template to get started for you. You can download it, extend that template, build your ideas around those pillars, the topics, the questions, the checks themselves, and the cautionary tales, like I mentioned. And once you're ready, you can upload it and start utilizing the custom lens. So in my case, I have a custom lens that I've already pre-populated. And the workloads then can start taking advantage of that custom lens. So I also have a sample workload, which is already configured to source that custom lens. So let's see what that looks like. So when I go to reviewing the workload utilizing that custom lens, all right, so coming up, you will notice that there are different pillars or topics. So I have an architecture topic, I have a release quality topic, and I have event management as a topic. So within those topics, just to organize my content in a more easy to manage way, each of those will have its set of questions. And like I said, each question will have its checks and associated resources as well. So let's take a look at an example here. So this question starts off with, those resilience patterns, a question earlier on, uh, is your workload designed to be resilient? So again, you have already codified that as a form of question and asking the audience to notate and provide documentation in the form of a diagram, for example. A great way to surface that and force the author of that workload to go through that check. I mentioned earlier those two checks that we derived working backwards. So let's take a look at that in perspective. The automated deployment for a developer experience, right? The safe rollout. So this question is precisely asking that. What are those automatic rollback strategies employed as part of your deployment? Do you have that capability where automated rollbacks are initiated through monitoring? Or is there an alternative manual way for the operator to step through? And there is links provided as well as sample patterns. So you can customize all this at will as you see relevant to your organization's ORR check. Let's take a look at one more example. In the event management, for example, JVM metrics, your infrastructure metrics. So do you monitor an alarm on your JVM metrics or on your key resource metrics like file systems, inodes, or your CPU memory utilization? And then you have checks associated as well as cautionary tales, or you can say helpful resources on why those checks are important, that is contextual for each check. So a lot of flexibility available as a builder for you to come up with your own custom lens that can help drive that ORR checks in a tool format. And for more documentation, if you look at our public page on custom lens, you'll find all those insights on how to go about creating a custom lens, validate the publishing process, the various aspects I talked about, the elements, core elements, and these are all in a JSON structure, right? We talked about. So what are those key elements that you need to define and customize? Let's switch gears and talk about the second pattern, the desired state configuration. We are leveraging AWS config and conformance packs specifically. So in my console, you can see I have a conformance pack that I've implemented. It's basically a collection of those configuration rules as well as remediation actions that can be displayed for your AWS account. You can also do it across your AWS organizations. And I've chosen this particular one. It's interesting. It's on reliability best practices based on our well-architected guidance. And what this does is periodically conformance pack will evaluate my resources and inspect its configuration state against the defined rules and flag those resources that do not comply to those definitions. And those that do comply are marked as compliant. Again, a centralized view for dynamically achieving that desired state config. When you look at our public documentation, we provide loads of examples, sample templates for you to choose from and adapt and extend. So again, going specifically to the well-architected reliability pillar, you can see across different resource categories, those key configuration best practices have already been set up as these rules and starting points. You can choose to utilize them and extend. Calling attention to this specific one on auto scaling group ELB health check. You may recollect in the presentation, I mentioned about from an operator lens, how to achieve that health alert governance. This is a good example of that in action. So what in effect is it's checking if an ELB health check has been configured or not for your auto scaling group. Very important pattern. And then there are others as well that you can take a look in detail. So I invite you, take a look at all these samples that are available, published in these are YAML documents. Those samples are available in GitHub as well. And you can adapt your desired state configuration using conformance packs and take advantage of those today. All right, let's switch back to our presentation at this point. Clint, is there any questions before we move on?
Yeah, we covered quite a bit there, Arvin. I have a question for you. Whenever you're going through the well-architected tool, which is self-service through the AWS console within an individual AWS account, who is the target audience for completing the well-architected framework for a workload? Like, who would go through and do that?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And this all goes back to operating model. You may have separated responsibility between platform and engineering versus development and operations, or some of those could be collapsed. But all in all, I think every representation from every team as they go through their life cycle of developing a workload and realizing and supporting day two operations,
Mm-hmm.
all of those stakeholders will benefit from going through the activity. Uh, and that is why those pillars, if you notice, exist. So the first pillar was focused on architecture, and those typically are more, aligned closely to the development teams and the solutions architect. Whereas release quality would be, the function of the teams. If you have a separated responsibility for teams that do the load testing, characterization, performance testing, then that becomes, easily available for them to focus on, as well as day two operations, your incident response team, so going through the event management.
Mm-hmm.
Now, even though you have segregated it, it doesn't mean that, in fact, it's beneficial that other teams now have access to the same set of principles of ORR checks of what other teams are responsible for or invested in. So this also helps with collapsing or reducing the tribal knowledge
Mm-hmm.
and breed that shared responsibility, shared learning construct.
Yeah, definitely. And today we focused on the operational excellence pillar within the well-architected framework. There is also the security, reliability, performance, efficiency. There's the cost optimization, and the newest addition is the sustainability pillar to the well-architected framework. We did have one question come through here. So in the demo, Arvind, you mentioned the custom lens, which is new as per reInvent last year. And then we also have the conformance pack, which gives us the desired state configuration. Why have one over the other? Like, doesn't the config rule take off the burden? Like, what's the value of the custom lens check?
Yeah, obviously, uh, think of recollect that we talked about ORR as a life cycle. So
Mm-hmm.
as you go through, you may not be able to automate everything from day one. So obviously, it's still important for your business outcomes for your teams to be thinking about those lessons learned and invested in making sure that they are following those recommendations of those patterns that you have established. As you go through the process of bringing more robustness in your operations, you may very well be taking off that burden from those checks through iteration and achieving desired state config, automated remediations where you can,
Right.
etc. So it's a combination. And also keep in mind that not every pattern of a desired state config may be easily adaptable across different, for example, business units. Maybe there is a team that is focused on serverless patterns or high performance computing. So those are the places where having a same standard configuration item may not be viable. So this is where, putting it in the perspective of a check makes more sense. So things that can be automated and cannot, so they go hand in hand.
Perfect. The layered approach, just like security, is the path forward. So Arvind, I understand you got a few more slides left to go here, so feel free to take it away.
Excellent. So based on what we covered so far from the demo segment, uh, find out what's the most important readiness items. So you can start small, be very focused and deliberate. We talked about those strategies working backwards. Look at those business promises like your SLAs, your compliance adherence, etc. Next, you select your top one or two business critical workloads. Review them against the ORR checklist that you have derived. And this will help keep those checks pertinent and revisit and remove the ones that are not applicable. Gaining adoption, leverage a tooling to scale out. But to get started, you derive that checklist first. Again, bringing back that same point that it's a life cycle, it doesn't have to be perfect from day one. Through broadening the adoption is where you will learn more quickly. So start anywhere, start with those key checks and apply them in your organization, see what works, what doesn't. So real quick to conclude, we started with understanding those operational challenges, business challenges for supporting and launching workloads. We talked about how ORR is deliberately designed and aligned to meet your outcomes. We talked about that mental model or the mechanisms in the form of those flywheel, the operational flywheel, as well as working backwards. We talked about tools, how tooling can help lower the barrier of entry for your teams to adopt. And like you saw in the demo, you have ways to get started right away, even if you don't have a tool today. So definitely employ some of these strategies and connect with us and give us feedback. I do want to close by saying that no one gets the luxury of choosing when their things will break. We just inevitably know they will. So when the moment chooses you, that is a failure, will you be ready? So when you go back to work, ask yourself, do I have that operational baseline? If I do, was it created with the relevant stakeholders? Does it cover people, process, technology? Is it enforced through code? Does it assess compliance automatically and constantly? So on and so forth. Obviously, there's a lot we can go on in this topic. And like we announced in the beginning, we just launched, and I'm pleased to share this ORR white paper that I co-authored. So definitely review that for a lot more details on this subject. I also added additional resources that you can take advantage of. So definitely take a look at all these and happy building. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for that presentation, Arvind. And to the attendees online, Arvind is definitely a subject matter expert whenever it comes to the realm of operational readiness and getting applications to run long term within production. Today we talked about the well architected pillar, specifically the operational excellence, or excuse me, the well-architected framework, specifically the operational excellence pillar. And within there is the operations readiness review. Shared with you a white paper, lots of different resources and things. We do have a few minutes left, so I'll pause for a second here and see if any additional questions from the audience do come in. So throw those in the chat there. In the meantime, if you do have any additional questions afterwards that you think of, please feel free to throw those over in repost.aws online forum where you can ask questions. And again, just like we touched on in the beginning of the episode, who knows, might feature on a future episode of AWS Supports You. Every Monday, we do air at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and next week's discussion on Monday, July 11th, is going to be with my colleague, Rob Higuerita, and he is going to be chatting with our enterprise support customer over at Spreaker.com, and they'll be discussing how they were able to make AWS work for them. That should be a very good discussion to hear firsthand from an AWS enterprise support customer on what's worked for them. Let me check back over in the chat. We don't have any additional questions that have come through as of now, Arvind. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day, Arvind, to join us. We appreciate it. Check out the white paper that he posted, some food for thought there. You know, I think if I was to look back on some of the customers that I've worked with whenever I was a TAM before, is helping understanding that you don't have to try to boil the ocean, and you can start small and take some of the initial, winnings there and improvements and sort of scale it out. You don't have to do all of your applications at one time from an operations readiness review. Maybe you pick one to start with that is a new launch or an upgrade that you have coming. Start with that, see what works, innovate and iterate, and start to build it into the culture within your organization and try to achieve some early successes, get some folks behind it. That's really how you see these sorts of frameworks and review cycles and getting developers on board or operations teams or security or senior leadership bought into these new methodologies for scaling and trying to move faster than what was possible before. So Arvind, any closing remarks today?
No, thank you again, Clint. And it was a pleasure sharing this with our audience here. There's a lot of work that went into helping and understanding, our mental model and how to relate it to our customers.
Mm-hmm.
So we definitely value any feedback, from the white paper and other resources.
Fantastic. If you'd like to get in touch with us here at the show, you can email us, awssupportsyou@amazon.com. Please let us know. And we will catch you next Monday, July 11th. Rob will be the host. And until then, I hope you all have a great week and happy cloud computing.